who is the boiled one.
Cava și pula voastră, ce e aici, bă? Mamă,
Lagi kasama ko naman yung pinagagawa mo.
Game.
Game.
Inna lillahi ya Allah. Ini nggak disungkas, ini kita maju ya.
The history of Stow Lake, located in the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, is shrouded in mystery. Stow Lake is said to be haunted by the spirit of a woman who, after attempting to save her child who fell in the water, drowned in the lake. Now, legend goes that this woman, referred to as the White Lady, so always the White Lady, wanders the edges of Stow Lake as she searches for her baby. It is said that she can even be summoned by visitors, with the most active area surrounding the lake being near the Pioneer Women and Children statue. The legend states that the statue, depicting a woman with children, houses the spirit that haunts Stow Lake. People have noted that at night the statue seems to have 3 children surrounding her instead of 2 older ones and one that is barely a toddler. Anyone wishing to summon the White Lady can do so by calling out, "White Lady, White Lady, I have your baby," 3 times, which seems very cruel if you ask me. Now, if she believes you, the woman will appear before you and will ask for her baby back. However, for doing this, the woman will haunt you for the rest of your life. However, if you tell the woman you don't have her baby, legend says she will drag you into Stow Lake and give you the same death she suffered. It is also noted that the White Lady of Stow Lake is not the only ghost to be found residing in San Francisco. Of course, and if you wish to explore the creepy haunted history, you can do so with Haunted San Fran Ghost Tour. Coming in at number 4, we have the Dark Watchers. The Dark Watchers is a name given to a group of entities in California folklore purportedly seen observing travelers along the Santa Lucia Mountains. The Dark Watchers are said to be tall, sometimes giant-sized featureless dark silhouettes often adorned with brimmed hats or walking sticks. They are phantoms that are said to lurk inside the Erie Mountains. Legend has it that the Dark Watchers have claimed to be seen staring out at the vast space below the mountains before completely vanishing. Now, this legend may be attributed to the Chumash people who historically inhabited the central and southern coastal regions of California, with the ghostly figures first appearing in their Indian history and lore. The cave walls were donned with drawings by the Chumash that depicted these phantoms. John Steinbeck also went on to write about the Dark Watchers in his story Flight, where the creatures were described as dark forms against the sky. I quote, "Pepe looked suspiciously back every time or so, and his eyes sought the tops of the ridges ahead. Once on a white barren spur, he saw a black figure for a moment, but he looked quickly away, for it was one of the Dark Watchers. No one knew who the Watchers were, nor where they lived, but it was better to ignore them and never to show interest in them. They did not bother one who stayed on the trail and minded his own business." Steinbeck's son, Thomas Steinbeck, would also grow up to report having seen the Dark Watchers during his childhood, and later, along with artist Benjamin Brode, collaborated on a book titled In Search of the Dark Watchers, where they go into the history of the legend and interview locals who claim to have seen them, such as the famed Big Sur resident Billy Post. In more recent history, sightings occurred in the 1960s by a Monterey High School principal. Coming in at number 3, the Monster of Elizabeth Lake. Now, I should preface this point by saying that there are at least 10 different Elizabeth Lakes in California, but the one we're talking about today is in LA County near Palmdale, and is perhaps the oldest one in the state. Now, it is said that Elizabeth Lake was created by the devil himself for the keeping of his hellish pets. The legend also goes on to state that if you swim deep enough, you will stumble across the passageway to hell. Throughout the years, there have been countless sightings of a monster that is said to have the neck of a giraffe, head of a bulldog, bat wings, and is said to be 50 feet long with a rancid scent of decay. For over a century, sightings have been reported and strike fear into the locals' hearts. It is said that locals have been so scared that landowners would actually sell or completely abandon their properties. Not to mention, any attempt to build on the lake's land has come to no avail. At night, residents could hear screams from the lake and would have horribly disturbing visions. Farm animals would also disappear, and sightings of flying, winged creatures were also reported. However, like all urban legends, any proof of creatures' existence or death is yet to be discovered. Coming in at number 2, we have Turnbull Canyon Hauntings. Turnbull Canyon is a 4-mile loop located near Whittier, California, and is part of Puente Hills Preserve. Turnbull is known for the view it provides of the Heisler Temple and Rose Hills Memorial Park. However, it has also been the source of rumors regarding paranormal activities. Death is said to reside within the canyon, the place itself once being referred to as Hutuknan, which means the place of the devil. The legend tells of the region being haunted by the Indians who were murdered for not converting to Catholicism. Their spirits are now said to linger in unrest in the canyon. Years later, Turnbull would also be the site of numerous satanic rituals held by cults attempting to conjure demons or even Satan himself, often by sacrificing children from the nearby orphanages. However, one day one of the sinister cults suddenly vanished, and what was left behind in their wake were paranormal sightings and occurrences being reported by hikers and locals, who have also claimed to have seen hooded figures, hellish creatures, and mutilated children. Not to mention, more mysterious deaths have since occurred, with one teenager being electrocuted while exploring the ruins by an old asylum in the canyon. A plane also crashed there in 1978, taking the lives of 29 people. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have the Hollywood sign spirit. Probably one of the most infamous legends to come out of California is the Hollywood sign spirit, which is said to be haunted by early 1900s actress Peg Entwistle. Entwistle was a British stage and screen actress who began her career back in 1925, appearing in several Broadway productions. By 1932, during the height of the Great Depression, Entwistle was in Los Angeles with a role in the Romney Brent play The Mad Hope starring Billy Burke. Following that, Entwistle found her first and only credited film role for radio pictures called 13 Women. However, on September 18, 1932, a woman was hiking below the Hollywood sign when she found a woman's shoe, purse, and jacket. She opened the purse and found a suicide note, after which she looked down the mountain and saw the body below. Entwistle's body remained unidentified until her uncle, with whom she had been living with, identified her remains. The suicide note was eventually published and read as follows: "I am afraid. I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain. P.E. Nowadays, Entwistle is referred to as the Lady in White, who is said to appear to people hiking to the off-limits part of the sign, where she killed herself. However, as opposed to appearing as the beautiful actress she was, she is often seen with a skeletal face and deep hollowed-out eyes. It is also said that if hikers are alone, the Lady in White will influence them to also plummet off the Hollywood sign."
Kicking off the list at number 5, Grandma's House. This first one is from Abby Cadabby and comes from Connecticut. My grandma's house has always, for as long as I can remember, been a scary place. Most of them are. My dad and aunt and uncle all grew up in the house and had paranormal experiences occur throughout their lives. One example was when my dad and uncle were teenagers, my uncle was walking down the steps and was swinging a towel, as he had just washed his hair. Out of nowhere, my dad, who was standing in the living room at the bottom of the stairs, saw the towel straighten out in front of my uncle as if someone pulled it, and my uncle fell forcefully down the stairs. Ooh! This is when I would quit, personally. That would for sure. After I saw that towel fling up, I'd be out of there. Now, my grandma hates all things paranormal, especially Ouija boards, so it's a big no-no in our family to discuss the paranormal events that occur in her house. Around 8 years ago, my oldest brother moved into the basement of their house. One night when he was home alone, he woke up out of a deep sleep, having felt like he was shaken by somebody. He stood up and instantly smelled gas, so he went upstairs and outside of the house. Later, he found out there was a carbon monoxide leak, and if he hadn't woken up, there's a big chance he could have died in his sleep. So months after that, when my grandparents were away for the weekend, the family decided to try a ghost radar app in their house. I guess that's a good solution other than a Ouija board, which is a radar. We'll see. We all sat around the phone and my uncle asked the normal questions, like is anyone here, what's going on, blah blah blah. And then he asked who used to live in the basement. And at this point, my brother had moved out. That's very important. The ghost radar replied with my brother's full name, which no one ever calls him. We were shocked, so my uncle asked, how did you save him? And it replied with, awake. Huh? And then he asked, what did you save him from? And it said, gas. That's crazy. Needless to say, we were shocked. The last thing I'm going to talk about that happens in the house is my grandparents' friend's obituary, who passed away probably 15 years before. It will show up in their kitchen every month or so. They usually say hello to their friend and put the obituary back in the basement where it's supposed to stay. A little while later, it will show back up in the kitchen. I would tape that thing to something. I would tape it to the wall. I would turn that phone off, by the way, that Ouija board, like radar app. No way, that shouldn't be in the app store. That shouldn't be $1, no chance. And number 4, Ouija board troubles, all the way from Kentucky. This one is fresh off the press, posted not too long ago from username Totenkopf907. It started with my sister and a group of her friends playing with a Ouija board when we were younger. Classic start. My sister and her friends were between the ages of 10 and 12, and I just being 7. Okay, I'm the same age for my sister, so already I'm freaked out by the story. My grandmother told me that because I was the youngest and the most innocent of the group, something latched to me. Awesome, now I'm even more afraid. I have many stories to tell, but I'll tell some of the shorter stories unless you guys and girls are interested in hearing more. Yes, we'll definitely keep an eye on this user. My mom saw a black figure which looked like a person crawling on all fours with dislocated joints coming down the hallway wearing one of my Halloween masks, and when my mom turned to face it, it disappeared. She screamed my name thinking it was me trying to scare her and play tricks. But when she saw that I poked my head out of the day room, which was an added-on living room to the trailer, her face lost even more color. She had me go into my room and dig out a Halloween mask that was a skull-faced plate with horns around the top. She said the figure was wearing it and she wanted it out of the house. Fair, that makes sense. On 3 separate occasions, my grandmother had woken up to a little boy wearing an early 19th century sailor suit, and when she looked closer at him, she could see that his skin was pale and it was dark blue/black around his eyes and lips. Sounds like a ghost to me. Another time I was playing with my dog by throwing a blanket over my head and he would pull the blanket off. My dog started to whimper and cry before I could take the blanket off to see what was wrong, and I heard a deep raspy male's voice breathing heavily into my ear. That's horrible. My dog then proceeded to freak out and bark, even worse. These are the shorter stories that I have, the rest are long enough to make a movie and or thick chapter book. Make the book, man, or make the movie. I'll buy it. Audiobook, movie, short story, campfire stories. I'll listen to anything. I'm in. This sounds like a haunted house. Movie in the making. Let's go. Number 3, La Llorona. Remember the 2019 flick, The Curse of La Llorona? Sorry if I'm saying it wrong or kind of weird. But after this story, you might want to watch it again. This one comes to us from DJ Underdog 85. Cool name. This happened to me when I was about 11 years old. It was the 90s. I've lived my whole life in El Paso, Texas. The culture is rich in folklore and religious beliefs. Many Hispanic families have stories of the paranormal. One popular legend is the legend of the Weeping Woman, aka La Llorona, Spanish for the Weeping Woman. Okay, so the tall, thin spirit is said to be blessed with natural beauty and long flowing black hair. Nice. Wearing a white gown, she roams the rivers and creeks, wailing into the night and searching for children to drag, screaming to a watery grave. No one really knows where the Weeping Woman's story begins or where it came from, though the tales vary from source to source. The one common theme is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. No one really knows where the Weeping Woman's story begins or where it came from, though the tales vary from source to source. Now, the one common theme is that she is the spirit of a doomed mother who drowned her children and now spends eternity searching for them in rivers and lakes. Spooky. So one night, just like any other night, I lived in a trailer with my mom and dad. My youngest brother was staying with my aunt this night. So I fell asleep watching Jay Leno as usual, and when I woke up, I was on the sofa in my living room. The time was 4 a.m. exactly, which illuminated from the stove in the kitchen. The TV was off, and normally I had a light on, but this time it was pitch black. So I woke up and heard a horrible screaming that was coming from far in the distance. The screaming was coming from a ditch that was a few feet away from my home, so I heard it and thought I was hearing things. So I asked myself, am I dreaming? And then I started to hear the animals outside howling and whimpering, cats and dogs. The screaming was something I've never experienced ever before. It sounded like I was in a big hallway and a woman was screaming her guts out down that hallway. It echoed. And then in all the screaming, I started to make out words. The woman said, "Oh my children." So in a huge panic, I quickly got up from the sofa and ran to the kitchen, which was right next to where I was asleep. I turned the closest light on and looked around. The screaming didn't stop. In fact, the screaming only got louder and closer. I questioned my sanity at this moment. Was I going crazy or hearing things? Then I thought to myself, nope, this is real. The animals are responding in a negative way. This is real life. So I did what any 11-year-old boy would do in a moment like this. I ran to my mom and dad's room. I reached for my mom and shook her awake wildly. She woke up slowly, and to my amazement, the screaming faded away as she woke up. Ugh, that sucks. I thought to myself, what the heck is going on? So I told my mother, do you hear that screaming and crying lady? My mom was half asleep and she said, go back to sleep, it's most likely just your imagination. And I said, no, this is real, please just listen with your ears. You hear that? My mom quickly just said, you're dreaming, go back to sleep, it's gonna be okay. And by then the screaming had faded away as if whatever was screaming knew that the adult was awake. I was terrified as well. I returned to the living room and quickly turned off the television and left most of the lights on as well. I didn't go back to sleep until the sun came up, of course. I couldn't believe what I heard and witnessed. I was treated like a crazy person whenever I told my story. It got so bad that I kept my experience to myself. And to this day, I don't care what people think of my experience. I know what I heard, and a couple years later, it happened to me again. Okay, the movie was scary, let alone hearing about a story in real life. That's awful. And number 2, the Nebraska Haunting. This comes from Casey Ignis and it's making rounds online. When they were 16 years old, they started working at a Subway sandwich shop a few miles away from their house. I was in a fairly decent neighborhood with a fire station across the street. However, that didn't stop me from feeling uneasy when taking out the trash in the dark by myself at 10 p.m. Hey, I know the feeling. I worked at a retirement home and taking out the garbage was a challenge. There was a lot of stories, a lot of creepy stuff that happened there. I'll save that for another video. They continued to say that when they first started working there, everything was going great. I made a new friend, I was enjoying going to work. We were pretty short-staffed, so besides the 2 managers, it was just me and a coworker, Jackie. Being understaffed, Jackie opened the store and worked until 4 p.m. and I closed the store, working of course from 4 until 10:30. At first, nothing big happened. I always felt uneasy when I was alone, but nothing I couldn't ignore. And then small things started happening. The doorbell would go off when the door was shut and locked. On our shelf in the back, we had bags of sauce. Those would slide off the shelf and onto the floor, even when they were a foot away from the ledge. Things would randomly go missing. There was a door in the back that led outside where you could go and take a smoke break, and there would always be something or someone knocking on it. I would see small shadows out of the corner of my eyes all the time, especially at night around 9:30. And one night, my friend came to visit me at work, as they should. If I had a friend that worked at Subway, I would be there 4 times a week. We were standing there talking when all of a sudden she froze up and goes, "Do you hear that?" And right as I was about to tell her I didn't hear anything, this big gust of freezing air goes right in between us and we hear a growl come from the back. She got scared and left, but I had to stay an extra hour still with my shift. No way! She's like, "I'm out of here. Good luck with your closing. Have fun with the Italian herbs and cheeses and ghosts. I'm out of here. See ya." So I was already freaked out, so I called the general manager's son and begged him to come close for me. He didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that, so he was pretty annoyed when I called. But he ended up coming anyways. Clutch. When he got there, he came in through the back door. I told him what happened and he told me I was just hearing or seeing things, and then we walked to the front of the store. Right when we got there, he froze and was staring out the windows. The entire front of the store was covered in tiny child-sized handprints, all the way where nobody could even reach. I asked him if he finally believed me and he just nodded. I quit the next day. Yeah, I don't think that's a 2-week notice type of thing. I think you see the handprints and then you just grab your green apron and toss it, and then you never look back. So I'm so sorry, Casey. And before we get to number 1, guys, if you like what you see or hear so far, toss us a like down in the corner because it really goes a long way. Let's get down to number 1. Number 1, Folsom Prison Booze. This one's awesome and it comes to us from user Aberdo, posted about 8 months ago. I used to work in the prison that held Florida's death row at one point in my career, before transferring to a prison that was much closer to home. Due to the fact that I'm a female, they really didn't want me on the row unless it was for training. So during my training, I was given a tour of the row and the death chamber. That's a fun little tour. Our death chamber is comprised of 2 rooms. One holds our gurney for lethal injection and one holds our electric chair. I wasn't technically working on the row, but we did have an inmate who was on death watch, and there needed to be an officer in there with them 24/7. Death watch is where the inmate moved to the final holding cell until the execution, where they received their last meal and everything like that. An officer came to relieve me for a 15-minute break, and due to the size of this prison, I couldn't really walk out and have a smoke in time, so I decided to just explore a little bit on my break out of morbid curiosity. I walked into the room with the gurney and I saw it from the window, and I felt my heart sink knowing that the inmate that I was watching over would be strapped down to it just in a few hours' time. I ended up finding myself in the room with the chair, and when I did, something felt really off. I felt a mix of feelings, despair, anxiety. My mind was racing. I felt uneasy and I turned to leave the room when I heard, "You didn't think I would be back, huh?" I felt like I was in an Arctic tundra. I began to shiver. My spine was tingling. I was frozen in fear because I knew that I'd entered the chamber alone. I forced myself to turn back and I had my pepper spray in hand just in case I ran into an inmate that somehow escaped from the row. I did run into an inmate, but definitely not one that I was expecting to. I was staring dead into the face of Ted Bundy sitting in the chair that he died in. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, my heart was racing and I felt like I was gonna faint. I began backing away slowly. It was like he was alive, but he wasn't though, and the only way that I would have known that this was an apparition was because I knew that he'd been executed in the 80s. So still frozen in fear, I watched what happened to be an alive Ted Bundy disappear like he had never been there in the first place. So I got the hell out of there and was unable to speak to anybody the rest of the day. I don't blame you. I would sprint out of there. Also, of all the famous ghosts to see, Ted Bundy, really? Damn. What a bad gamble.
In at number 5 we have Space Mountain. There are a surprising amount of urban legends surrounding this ride at Disney World, which is odd. It is just a ride after all, right? Nothing strange about it. According to legend, one rider was decapitated while on Space Mountain because he supposedly stood up while riding. What a f***ing idiot. Now this is only a little bit true. There was a decapitation, but it was on a test dummy, not a real person. No person has ever been killed while riding Space Mountain. However, there is another dark legend that surrounds this ride. According to legend, on Space Mountain you can find Mr. One-Way. Some accounts describe Mr. One-Way as a red-haired man with a red face, with stories stating that he hangs out in the line for Space Mountain. But this differs depending on who you ask. According to video footage, Mr. One-Way will sometimes get onto the ride with other passengers, grabbing an available seat. However, it is said that he disappears right before you reach the final tunnel at the end of the ride. On top of that, there is supposedly a second ghost called Disco Debbie, who is also said to haunt Space Mountain, and according to some riders, she glows in the dark. Very freaky indeed. Coming in at number 4 we have Magnolia Creek Lake. Magnolia was once a thriving riverport town in southern Wakulla County, Florida, which was established all the way back in the 1820s and is now classified as an extinct city by the State Library and Archives of Florida. All that remains of the city is a cemetery, with the last known burial being back in 1859. Magnolia Creek Lane is a narrow road fit for one car at a time south of Montverde on the west side of Lake Apopka. According to legend, the road and surrounding lake is haunted by around 200 passengers who were killed in a train wreck. However, many have attempted to find evidence of this, but none has ever been found, yet the legend continues. Now, while the road appears to be built on an old train track, the only documented railroad runs slightly north of the location. Now, this road is supposedly where all kinds of horrible things happened back in the 1890s, and according to some locals, at the creek that runs to Lake Apopka, you can hear the loud screams in the woods. However, when you get closer, they move farther away. The screams are said to be that of the train crew that died. However, skeptics believe this is actually sound that is being reflected from another place. According to a local, Michelle, she said, I quote, "My cousin went to Montverde Academy and heard about this road that runs off 455 that used to be a railroad bed. And they say that if you go down there at night, you can hear ghostly sounds and see eerie shadows of people walking on the road. I don't know for sure about this because I never went there, so it is just what I heard." Coming in at number 3, I-4 Dead Zone. Interstate 4 is a highway in Florida that spans 132 miles, with it running from Tampa all the way to Daytona Beach. Now, the interstate is frequented daily by folks heading to work and those on their way to Disney World. Now, while it is a popular highway, it is also another nickname for it, the Dead Zone, an area where folks need to be particularly careful. This area of the highway has been the location of many accidents, electronic malfunctions, as well as supposed ghost sightings. So why exactly is this spot so dangerous and filled with so much paranormal activity? Well, this is because this quarter mile of highway was built over a gravesite, and as we know from movies, a disturbed gravesite means bad news bears. It means you're in for a nasty surprise. It means you're gonna die. Don't believe it? Well, oddly enough, on the very first day the new interstate was opened, a tractor trailer carrying frozen goods lost control and crashed directly above the disturbed graves of people who had died from yellow fever. It is believed that around 1,500 to 2,000 accidents have occurred on the highway since 1963, which is a lot. And worse still, many of those accidents resulted in death, and between a 24-month period, there were around 44 car accidents, resulting in approximately 65 people being injured. Some locals fear this area of the highway so much that they actually take a much longer route around it. On top of all of this, back in the 1950s, a young boy was said to have disturbed the graves, and the following night he was killed by a drunk driver. And to add insult to injury, the driver was never caught. Coming in at number 2, we have the Devil's Chair, also known as the Haunted Chair. This is an urban legend hailing from folklore that is attached to a class of funerary or memorial sculpture common throughout the United States during the 19th century. Now, these chairs were known as the mourning chairs for visitors to cemeteries to sit on when visiting loved ones. However, since then, cemeteries have provided benches for similar purposes. Once the original purpose of these chairs fell out of fashion, superstition quickly developed in association with sitting in the chair. For example, some young people dare one another to visit the site, most often after dark or at midnight, or in some cases on Halloween. Stories state that if you sit sit in the chair at these specific times, something awful will happen, with people fearing that they will be punished. In Florida specifically, the Devil's Chair is located in Cassadaga, Florida, and is a graveside bench in the cemetery that borders Cassadaga as well as Lake Helen. According to legend, an unopened can of beer left on the chair will be empty by morning. Now, in some stories, the can has already been opened, and in others, the liquid is simply gone through the unopened top. On top of that, it is said that the devil will sometimes appear to anyone bold enough to sit in the chair itself. So if you do decide to visit the chair at night and take a seat expecting to meet the devil, just be sure to have a beer in hand ready for him, because it is said that he will be expecting one. As am I, all the time. I would like a beer. Maybe that's why I'm evil. I'm the devil. And finally, coming in at number 1, Legend of the Skunk Cape. Also known as the Swamp Cabbage Man, Swamp Ape, Stink Ape, Florida Bigfoot, and Louisiana Bigfoot, this is a creature that is said to inhabit Florida and is named for its appearance and for its unpleasant odor that is said to accompany it. The ape has supposedly been a part of Florida folklore since the settler period, which is absolutely insane. One of the first reports of the skunk ape in Florida came from the year 1818, when a report spoke of a man-sized monkey or ape raiding stores and stalking fishermen. This became particularly common in the 60s and 70s, with one sighting occurring in 1974 which spoke of a large foul-smelling hairy ape-like creature which was said to run upright on 2 legs in the neighborhood of Dade County, Florida. However, some people were skeptical, including investigator Joe Nickel, who stated that these reports may represent a black bear and that other sightings may in fact be hoaxes or misidentification of wildlife. In terms of appearance, the creature is said to resemble the Sasquatch of the Pacific Northwest. However, the skunk ape is said to be shorter in comparison, has long patches of fur on the shoulders and arm, and is often described as a mottled rusty red colour as opposed to the Sasquatch's brown and black coat. In at number 5 we have Empire State Building Bermuda Triangle. We've all heard about the Bermuda Triangle. Also known as the Devil's Triangle, it is loosely defined as being a region in the western part of the North Atlantic Ocean. A number of aircraft and ships are said to have disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Since then, planes changed their flight path to avoid the triangle. Others avoid going anywhere near it altogether. But did you know New York has its own version of the Bermuda Triangle? It is located in Midtown, more specifically a large radius around the Empire State Building. Starting in 2008, drivers started to complain about the 5-block radius around the Empire State. Their cars would inexplicably die and refuse to start up again. It was almost every day, says Ronnie Yakubovich, manager of NYC Tire and Auto Care. He went on to explain that he would pick up the cars and tow them outside of the radius and they would suddenly start to work as normal. His best guess is that the radio signals from the broadcast beacon on the tower were disabling alarm systems in cars and preventing them from starting. But if that was so, why did this only start in 2008? The Empire State Building was opened in 1931, so why did this start so recently? I guess we'll never know what is causing the phenomenon. Maybe just avoid the area if you can. In at number 4, Super Rats of Hurricane Sandy. One New Yorker told the story of him and his roommates. They had lived peacefully in a 5th floor loft for years with barely a cockroach invading the space. Then, the winter after Hurricane Sandy, the noises began, scratching and scurrying. I walked into the kitchen one day and saw a rat the size of a small cat crawling across our food shelves, Kevin says. Traps and an exterminator proved ineffective. It was baffling that the rats would find their way to the 5th floor. Then the roommates read reports about rats fleeing inland from flooded subway tunnels after Hurricane Sandy. A theory was going around that the weaker rats were wiped out and the surviving rodents bred a new generation of tougher, meaner super rats. There are reports of super rats even today. Some businesses demand that the city steps in and does something as outside dining became more normal within the last year. The diners were being harassed by the giant rats. Many diners have had to leave due to the dangerous nature of the giant animals. They claimed the rats were getting increasingly hungry with the lack of tourism, leaving them with less to feed off on the streets. The city continues to claim that these super rats do not exist despite the number of sightings and photos of the giant rodents. Many live in fear that the rats might make their way into the apartments as they are harder to kill than the usual infestation. In at number 3 we have Cropsy. In the mid-90s, Ariel Abramowitz went to camp across from the notorious disused mental institution Willowbrook in Staten Island. She recalls counselors taking campers to an old building on the site, with something like blood smeared on the walls. They spooked them with tales of a boogeyman named Cropsy. Allegedly, he was a respected community member. He has a family and a child who he loved. One summer, he sent his child to the local camp. His son was later confirmed to have died at the camp. This sent the man mad. He disappeared from his life. No one knew where he had gone, but before he left, he vowed to get revenge on the other kids and campers. He was later found and taken to a mental hospital. The next time we would hear of him, he was described as a homicidal madman, an escaped mental patient with a hook for a hand who hunted children and dragged them back to the tunnel system that lay under the abandoned ruins of the old Seaview Hospital, a former tuberculosis sanitarium. Soon the urban legend would be unmasked as Andre Rand. Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, a place whose name alone has the power to frighten adults and children alike. The institution, built as a respite for children with intellectual disabilities, was revealed to be a living hell in the 1970s, although authorities wouldn't close the school until 1987. Rand had a long rap sheet of crimes against children. In 1983, he went to jail again after kidnapping a bus full of kids from the local YMCA and driving them to an airport. And though there wasn't enough physical evidence to charge him, police already suspected him in the disappearances of at least 4 other Staten Islanders. To this day, none of the bodies have been found. Rand's story and that of Cropsy continues to fascinate and horrify tri-state residents to this day. Coming in at number 2, we have Haunted Dakota. The Dakota building set the standard for Upper West Side apartment living, built at a time when the upper classes were only just becoming familiar with the concept of living in an apartment. It was known for having famous artists as residents, and the board were very picky about who they allowed to live there. One of the most famous couples to live at the Dakota was John Lennon and his wife Yoko Ono. Years after John Lennon was shot dead in front of his Central Park West apartment building, the Dakota, his widow Yoko Ono saw his ghost sitting at his white piano. She claims he turned to her and said, "Don't be afraid, I'm still with you." When he was alive, Lennon himself claimed to have spotted a figure wandering the halls of the Dakota, whom he referred to as the Crying Lady Ghost. Other residents are said to have encountered the spectre of a little girl about 7 years old, smiling and laughing and greeting people in the hallways. The Dakota's original owner, Edward Clark, had an interest in the paranormal and would often host seances to communicate with the dead. The more you play with the paranormal, the more likely you are to experience paranormal activity in the future, says paranormal researcher. She believes that when people are murdered suddenly and violently, their spirits linger. In John Lennon's case, his life was cut short in his prime. He was only 40 years old. Someone like him was happy to be alive. He was working, he had a small child, he had unfinished business. It's a prime recipe for a classic haunting. And finally, in at number 1, we have Mole People. There are around 700 miles of subway tracks underneath New York City. Did you know that the large sections of the track that isn't used is home to the Mole People? Thousands of homeless people and families have created a community underground. The Mole People are living under popular parts of town without the people who are walking above even knowing they are there. They travel under cover of darkness as not to be evicted from their underground homes. Ever since the Great Depression, there have been many homeless people in New York City. During the difficult period, people started using the subway tunnels as a place to live. The places where homeless people live are dangerous. Rodents and reptiles lurk through the tunnels. There are debris and other hazards in the dark, plus the darkness conceals criminals, and Mole People are often the victims of attacks. Thieves even steal what little they have. The entrances to the subway tunnels are easily accessible by anyone who has the desire to venture into them. There are numerous entrances throughout the city. However, it is illegal to enter, and going into them can result in criminal charges. Just like any place that numerous people live, the Mole People form communities. Most of them look after each other, but there is also a kind of hierarchy. Most of them are very territorial over the section of the tunnels where they live. After all, it is their home. There are couples and even families that live underground. The sad part is these people risk losing their kids if authorities find out they do not have a place to live. So the families living in the subway do their best to stay concealed. People are not the only ones living in the subway tunnels under New York City though. Many animals live beneath the streets. Some of the Mole People even domesticate these animals and live with them. These animals keep them company in the very isolated and lonely place they call home. The Mole People do anything they can to eat and obtain the things they need. It's difficult for them though. They have to wait until it's dark to emerge from their homes. If authorities see them, they risk getting in trouble. Throughout the years, the city has made efforts to clean sections of the subway tunnels. However, the task is so vast that many abandoned areas remain untouched, especially the parts of the system that are no longer in use. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. Coming in at 5, Arlington Screaming Bridge. Now this Texas legend will quite honestly make your hair stand on end. Legend has it that one full night more than 50 years ago, several teens were carpooling home after their high school football game. Still riled up over the victory, driving responsibly definitely wasn't of utmost importance to the young teens. The bridge running through Arlington's River Legacy Park was just wide enough for one car at a time. You can probably guess where this is going. The teens hooting and hollering drowned out all the noise, like that of a vehicle that had no working headlights. The cars collided head-on before erupting in a fiery explosion and plunging into the waters below. Nobody survived. The bridge is now closed to vehicular traffic, with the site only accessed on foot. However, it now has a new name gifted to it by locals, Screaming Bridge, a name which was coined after the first brave souls went exploring along the bridge and experienced events that can only be explained by the supernatural. Legend has it, if you stand on the bridge and gaze into the river below, you'll see a tombstone for each of the deceased with their names, date of birth and death. Visit at midnight on the anniversary and you'll hear two cars screeching towards each other before colliding. Coming in at 4, the nurse at Bexar County Hospital. If you ever find yourself in Texas, whatever you do not find yourself at the dilapidated Bexar County Hospital, because it is supposedly housing the spirit based on an American serial killer called Janine Jones. Now, the real-life killer is responsible for the deaths of up to 60 infants and children in her care as a licensed vocational nurse during the 1970s and 1980s. In 1994, she was convicted of murder and was sentenced to 99 years in prison with triple credit. Now, the legend of the nurse at Bexar County Hospital has similar treading, with legend stating that a murderous spirit used to wander the halls killing patients in order of their room number, first 201, then 202, 203, 204. It began in one ward where patients all began asking about one particular nurse. However, when the staff checked the security camera, they found the patients speaking to seemingly no one. They saw the curtains close on their own, tracheotomy tubes get pulled out by an unseen force, but then, very quickly, the patients began dying in their room number order. Like I said, many Bexar County locals believe the legend to be based off of Janine Jones, but what do you guys think? Coming in at 3, Summit Elementary School. In Amarillo, Texas, there's a haunting legend surrounding a closed and abandoned school that everyone avoids. The Summit Elementary School is one of the most haunted locations in all of Texas, and its dark history makes it a hub for ghosts and spirits alike. The school was open up until 1972 and is haunted for numerous reasons, including a janitor who killed students and stuck them in the boiler, racially motivated murders that took place in the school, and murdered prostitutes hidden in the walls. These are just a few of the legends surrounding the terrifying building. Worse still, legend has it that if you're brave enough to visit the abandoned school at night, your car may do strange things. Swings will move by themselves and you might even hear voices coming from the walls. Honestly, this school is beginning to sound like the one from Marianne, which is a French horror series you all need to watch immediately. Do it. The Queen demands it. Coming in at 2, the Candy Lady. Now, this very well might be one of the scariest urban legends I've ever read and may result in a lot of you sleeping with the light on tonight. Sorry in advance. This theory goes, I quote, "The Candy Lady allegedly lures children to their doom by leaving enticing goodies on their windowsills just before bedtime. Her plan is for the kids to wait for mum and dad to fall asleep before indulging in the sweet treats so as not to get in trouble. Afterwards, she'll grab them and feast on their sugar-laden blood until there isn't any left. Children began to go missing, yet no leads were ever found that would suggest they were kidnapped or ran away. As some of the remaining children got older, they confessed to eating candy left on their windowsills with a note from the Candy Lady, so parents started to wonder if the other children perhaps had been poisoned. The worry was soon put to rest when someone actually turned up dead. Not a child though, but a sheriff's deputy who had been investigating the disappearances. His eyes had been stabbed out with a fork, and his pockets stuffed with candy. A farmer also found a child-sized set of teeth inside a candy wrapper one morning while tending to his fields. Very creepy. The legend still remains in Texas, and whenever children go missing, people are very quick to blame the Candy Lady. And finally, coming in at number 1, Blackeyed Children. Blackeyed Children or Blackeyed Kids are a contemporary legend of supposed paranormal creatures that resemble children between the ages of 6 and 16 with pale skin and black eyes who are reportedly seen hitchhiking or are encountered on doorsteps of residential homes. Now, children are creepy already. They say strange things and their innocence allows them to breach the barrier between the living and the dead that we jaded adults just don't possess. However, the Blackeyed Children legend is one for the history books, and and is downright terrifying. In the late 90s, a journalist named Brian Bethel was working in his town of Abilene, Texas, when he encountered something he'll never forget. He was parked outside a movie theater when 2 children knocked on his window. Brian couldn't quite understand why, but he was completely overcome with fear at the sight of them. He rolled down the window regardless, and the kids asked him for a ride back to their home so that they could get cash for the movie. His fear, however, made him hesitate, but the children were persistent. They then began to say some weird things, like, "We're not armed" or anything. Brian looked back at the kids and noticed how their eyes had turned pitch black. They then began screaming at him that they could only come in the car if he invited them in, so he quickly drove away. He spread the word about the Blackeyed Children and was surprised when a lot of other people came forward reporting similar experiences.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Ogo Pogo. Let's start with a famous one. Move over, Nessie. We've got a Canadian sea cryptid to discuss. If you've ever been to British Columbia, you'll know that there are plenty of mountains and lakes to explore. One of the more well-known ones, both for its picturesque qualities and supposed housing of a monster, is Lake Okanagan. Situated in Kelowna, this lake is famous for its vacation-friendly beaches. But if you head out looking for a relaxing day on the water, you might meet up with a strange beast. Sightings of the Ogo Pogo date back to 1972, but indigenous legends have been telling tales of the creature for much longer. It's described as a long, slender creature with many humps and a horse head that peeks out of the lake during thunderstorms. Sound familiar? While not nearly as famous, Ogo Pogo is quite similar to Nessie when you get down to it. Both are aquatic, hard to find, and attract all sorts of cryptid hunters. All sorts of folks have claimed to see Ogo Pogo swimming around, popping its head out of the water from time to time. Photos and videos are common, but none are really verifiable or convincing. Thankfully, the creature seems to be relatively friendly. For all these sightings and rumors, there haven't been too many claims of violence or aggression from the lake-dwelling beast. In fact, it's actually quite well liked by everyone. In the 90s, the Canadian government commissioned a postage stamp in honor of Ogo Pogo. Way to go. Skeptics all have their explanations for what it might actually be, with one prevalent idea claiming that it's actually a primitive whale that only comes out during calmer seasons. Regardless of whether it's real or not, what's more fun to say in the end, Nessie or Ogo Pogo? I'll let you guys decide. Coming in at number 4, we've got the University of Toronto Phantom Worker. If a film is being shot in Toronto, you're more than likely going to catch a glimpse of U of T's campus. The school's buildings are ornate and beautiful, perfect for giving a scholarly feel to any scene. A lot of the buildings have facades that date back to the early 19th century, giving them a timeless feel. Of course, with any buildings that have been around so long, there will be ghost stories. Back in the 1920s, U of T built a Gothic memorial to honor students who had died during the First World War. During construction of this elaborate memorial, many workers were hired to help out. Legend says that one of the workers fell from the tower while polishing the bells, a true Hunchback of Notre Dame moment. Ever since that fateful incident, students and faculty alike have claimed to see the ghost of the worker wandering around campus. Some even claim that there have been ghostly apparitions falling from the tower. Folks who don't know the legend will run to see if the poor fellow is okay, but never find a body. So much for being a good Samaritan. There are many other ghost stories surrounding the university as well, but none so stomach-dropping. Stonemasons with murderous qualities, little girls lost in planetariums, and a baker who managed to trap his mistress inside a secret room. The stories are real, but are the ghosts still haunting the campus? I suppose you'll have to pay the institution a visit and find out. Just try not to get roped into paying tuition, alright? That's scarier than any ghost story. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Nennerlook. We've talked about urban legends from the far west coast and the most populous city, so now let's take a trip out east. Known for its quaint, peaceful charm, Newfoundland is the last place you'd expect to find terrifying urban legends, right? I mean, you can get screeched in and end up with a scary hangover and only a faint memory of your previous night, but that's something else entirely. The monster seen near Newfoundland dwells in the sea, but does so unconventionally. How do you think sea monsters usually get around? By swimming, right? Well, this thing acts a little differently than most. First sighted by Sir Humphrey Gilbert back in the 16th century, it was described as a lion-like creature. This fits the description of an Inuit cryptid known as the Nennerlook. Legends of such a creature have been passed down through generations of people, but it was considered just a legend to outsiders until Sir Humphrey Gilbert came across it himself. The Nennerlook is a gigantic beast estimated to be as tall as an iceberg. It's got white fur, huge ears, and loves to eat anything that gets close enough. Seals are the classic meal, but it won't turn down a human if they get close. Now, back to that bit about movement. The Nennerlook doesn't swim, it walks along the bottom of the ocean. Yep, not the most efficient way to get around, but it gets the job done. Imagine watching a gigantic beast just walk out of the sea towards you. This is also the reason why people say that it's not really ever seen away from shore. It makes sense considering how deep the ocean is. But if you ever spot a little antenna poking out of the water, it's time to get a move on. And if you ever hear a deafening roar, it's probably too late. Coming in at number 2, we've got the Cabbage Tunnel Monster. We'll return to Toronto for a moment, you know, because of the urban qualities of these legends. Get it? Well, every tunnel system has its fair share of legends, and the Cabbage Tunnel is no exception. I'm surprised nobody's gone back and tried to get footage of this strange creature. Back in the 70s, a kitten ran away from home. While searching for his lost feline, a man came across a tunnel in Cabbage Town. Thinking that the kitten might have run in here to hide, he descended down into the abyss. Scanning the darkness for any sign of the little animal, he noticed some motion off to the side. Thinking it might be what he was looking for, the man pointed his flashlight at the movement and saw something he was definitely not expecting, neither cute nor cuddly. He claims to have seen a monkey-like creature with glowing orange eyes standing at half the height of a man covered in gray fur. If that horrible sight wasn't enough, listen to this. The man froze up and kept his light trained on the monster. The monster didn't like this much and told the man in an awful, trembling voice, "Go away. Go away." And guess what the man did next? He hightailed it out of there and didn't look back. This story made its way around for a while, but nobody ever properly looked into it. That is, until a year later. The man's friend had convinced him to share his story, so he went to the Toronto Sun with the scoop. A reporter accompanied him back to the tunnel, and they both scoured the inside. Looking around, they didn't find any evidence of a monster, but they did discover the remains of a cat. Some speculate that the tunnel leads to a point in the Toronto sewer system, and others have different ideas. Either way, nobody has seen the Cabbage Town sewer monster since. Would you go looking? Finally, at number 1, we've got the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait. Heading back east for a moment, let's consider the Northumberland Strait. This is a body of water that separates Prince Edward Island from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. It's said that there is a ghost ship that sails upon the strait, more often than not totally engulfed in flame. The legend dates back over 200 years and always seems to play out the same way. Folks on land will look out to see a beautiful schooner with pure white sails. As they look on, these sails will catch fire and the whole ship starts burning. Often people will head out on rescue missions only to find that there was never a ship to begin with. Legend says that the ship will only appear before a northeast wind, predicting a storm. So where does this ghost ship come from, and why does it always come back? Well, some people believe that the ship was captained by a pirate who made a deal with the devil. The ship had been fired upon and was burning fast. He wanted his treasure hidden and protected, so he signed the pact and sealed his fate. Now he and his crew are doomed to sail forever on this perpetually burning ship. Yikes. Now, skeptics will tell you that the ghost ship is simply a mirage, but if that were the case, then how do they explain the flames? How very Canadian, eh? I'm glad my homeland has some legends that can stack up against the big ones from other nations. There are plenty more where that came from too. Any real Canadian remembers reading all sorts of real Canadian ghost story books after scholastic fairs.
Coming in at number 5, we have the Werewolf of Defiance. During the summer of 1972, the people of Defiance claimed they were being terrorized by a werewolf. On July 25th, 1972, Ted Davis, a railroad worker, noticed something strange. He saw 2 hairy, huge paws on the ground in front of him. Confused and likely scared, he slowly raised his eyes and saw before him a creature at least 6 feet tall, hunched over and holding a large wooden board. Before Ted had a moment to react, he hit Ted on the shoulder and ran away. Just a few days after, Ted and his colleagues spotted the return of the unknown creature, and again in the next following day there was another report. A panic began to spur through the town and newspapers about the strange sightings. With all the sightings, it was agreed that the werewolf was large and humanoid. There were enough reports that the Defiance, Ohio Police Department had to open an investigation into werewolves in the area. It is even reported in the various newspapers in Ohio. Eventually, after days of looking with no result, the case was closed. Many people thought it was a prank, but during this experience, people were actually afraid that there were either a creature or some individual dressing up and attacking people. The sightings always happened at night, generally by the train tracks. A couple of women said it would try to get into their houses by rattling the doorknobs. The animal was said to be huge, hairy, and dressed in rags. In at number 4, we have Moonville Tunnel. Located in southern Ohio, these haunted tunnels were once used for multiple railroads. The abandoned coal mining town of Moonville near southeastern Ohio was founded in 1856. At its peak, the town was home to about 100 miners and their families. Little remains of the abandoned coal mining town of Moonville except for a few foundations, a nearby cemetery, and an old railroad tunnel. Due to deterioration, the majority of the tunnels were abandoned, with some filled in for safety reasons. Now only a few remain open, one of which is famously known for being haunted. The railroads were the only route to Moonville, but throughout the years many people have died near the tunnel and train tracks. This is due to the fact that the tunnels were so narrow it was not possible for pedestrians to walk alongside the tracks in the tunnel while a train was passing through, which resulted in numerous fatalities. It is said that the Moonville Tunnel is haunted by ghosts of locals who died from being struck by passing trains. Legend has it the ghost of a man who was killed instantly by a train passing through the tunnel wanders along the track bed near the old tunnel at night. One of the most famous deaths at the tunnel comes from a brakeman worker. Around 1859, a brakeman for the railway fell asleep, and sometime during the night he was awakened by the sound of his train leaving the depot. He arose, stumbling onto the train track and falling beneath the wheels of the train. The brakeman never recovered from his injuries, and the ghost of the man is said to be stumbling down the tracks within the tunnel with a lantern in hand, still trying to catch the train before it leaves Moonville Station. This is why most who claim to have sighted the ghost of Moonville Tunnel say that he carries a lantern and is sometimes seen as a hovering orb of light. In at number 3 we have Melon Heads. Melon Heads is the name given to the urban legend of human-like beings that live in the forests of Michigan, Connecticut, and Ohio. The Melon Heads were originally abandoned children that a scientist by the name of Dr. Crow decided to take care of at his facility in Kirtland, Ohio. While the children stayed at the facility, Dr. Crow performed experiments. What got them the name Melon Heads was when Dr. Crow injected chemicals into their brains, which caused their craniums to grow abnormally large. Because of the abnormal growth, they developed hydrocephalus, which caused them to become mentally ill. After years of neglect, the Melon Heads ended Dr. Crow's life and burned down his facility. After the death of the mad scientist Dr. Crow, the Melon Heads decided to inhabit the forests of Crybaby Bridge. To survive, the Melon Heads feast on any animals that they hunted down. Because of their paranoia of society, the Melon Heads ate anyone that spotted them. To keep the Melon Heads cult going, they've kept inbreeding, making the offspring even more raving and paranoid. Legend holds that the Melon Heads reside in Wisner Road in Kirtland and Chardon Township, with locals and bypassers reported seeing and hearing the Melon Heads as they lurk in the forest looking for their next victim. Local lore depicts them as a territorial and angry, responsible for attacks, kidnappings, and theft of pets and livestock for food. An explorer even wrote a book about the first person encounter with Melon Head. Kelly Topradosian claims that she was exploring the grounds of the then abandoned Felt Mansion and her friends one night when she saw a small human in the distance. They had an unusually large head, but she wasn't scared. Then he started walking towards them. In at number 2 we have Myrtle Hill Cemetery. Residing in Cleveland, Ohio, the Myrtle Hill Cemetery is one mysterious and scary resting place. This legend starts with a 3-foot round granite memorial that pays homage to a witch by the name of Stoskopf. Local legends explain that old lady Stoskopf murdered her family and tossed them in a well. When the townsfolk discovered the grisly truth, they sentenced her to death. When she was buried standing up, and a massive gravestone was placed above her to weigh her spirit down. Though that being said, the legend was likely inspired by the real-life slayings carried out by Martha Wise. Martha poisoned her family's water supply and ultimately killed 3 family members, only a mere mile away from where the witch's ball stands today. Early on, Wise claimed the devil made her do it, with the plain dealer reporting more than 125 witnesses were called to testify to Wise's insanity, stating that sometimes she barked like a dog and frothed at the mouth, that she wandered the woods at night and caught several barns on fire. Wise served most of the rest of her life in Marysville Reformatory, where she died at 89 in 1971. Although she is buried in Marysville, her victims are all buried within a couple of hundred feet of the Stoskopf spherical monument, which wasn't installed, according to local residents, until at least the early 1940s. Locals say that if you touch the stone at night and it's warm, it means that the witch has escaped and she's on the hunt for her next victim. Many can't help but believe that the cemetery itself is haunted, and out of curiosity, many people visit the cemetery and trespass at night to try to interact with its residents' spirits. And finally, in at number 1 we have Rogues Hollow. From the tales of a haunted mill and a Crybaby Bridge to a shaking graveyard and a headless horseman, Rogues Hollow is known to be one of Ohio's most haunted areas. You can explore the park today, just be sure to stay away after dark, as that's when the ghosts come out to play. Ohio Rogues Hollow was once a populated mining village, but very few remnants of the coal mining town remain now. The town was actually once a place notorious for outlaws and gangsters to hide out. Shootouts and robberies were common here, and these continued until the early 20th century. In spite of the town's crooked reality and a peculiar tale, creepy things continue to happen here. There have been multiple reports of sounds of a crying baby at night, shaking grounds at a graveyard, and ghost sightings that haunt the abandoned town. The abandoned mines around Rogues Hollow are full of ghosts of miners who perished there in cave-ins and accidents, with reports of tools being picked up by unseen hands in the black shafts chipping away at veins of coal. Though the entrance to the mine has been permanently blocked, and the walkway near the mine shafts are equally plagued by residents of the spirit world. One old legend that haunts the town is of the Chideston Mill ghost. The ghost was believed to belong to a mill worker who fell into the wheel and was crushed beneath the churning waves. The ghost guarded the area and is filled with jealousy and spite. Because of the negative energy this ghost brings, he supposedly started a fire in the Chidester house when an outsider expressed interest in purchasing it. A more modern legend is the Crybaby Bridge. At the bottom of the hollow, a bridge crosses Silver Creek. According to legend, a car traveling across the bridge slid on ice and plunged into the creek. Its occupants were no longer alive. Today, you can hear the cries being heard from the surrounding woods. There are an endless amount of ghost stories circulating about the old mining town of Rogues Hollow, with eyewitnesses reported seeing women in frontier dresses, hearing old trains, crying and floating tools, leaving us even more certain in the belief of ghosts and spirits.